Right now, sitting entirely unnoticed in the bulk filtration aisles of commercial pool suppliers and massive agricultural depots across the globe is a highly porous, deeply fractured geological anomaly that costs exactly $8 a bag. It possesses absolutely no mechanical compressors. It contains 0 proprietary microchips. It requires no internet connection to function, and it will never, under any circumstances, demand a mandatory firmware update from a massive corporate server to continue operating. Yet, through a brutal, uncompromising application of subatomic molecular sieving and raw chemical adsorption, this incredibly primitive, naturally occurring volcanic mineral is capable of violently stripping massive quantities of microscopic water vapor directly from the air, dropping localized humidity levels, and passively cooling your home. The $50 billion global residential HVAC and appliance cartel knows exactly what this crystalline mineral is. In fact, their entire modern business model, a model explicitly predicated on selling you highly fragile, constantly vibrating plastic dehumidifiers that aggressively consume heavily taxed electricity while paradoxically pumping waste heat back into your living room, relies entirely on your absolute ignorance of how to mathematically deploy this $8 bag of rocks. They have spent the last half-century aggressively marketing the highly profitable, completely fabricated illusion that controlling the moisture and comfort of your home mathematically requires a massive, complex appliance tethered permanently to their heavily metered grid. They want you terrified of black mold, structural rot, and suffocating summer humidity, and they want you entirely, perpetually dependent on their extortionate infrastructure to prevent it. Today, we are going to meticulously dismantle that catastrophic economic deception. I am going to show you exactly how to completely bypass their entire synthetic financial ecosystem using nothing more than an $8 bag of volcanic earth and the unyielding, mathematically absolute laws of physical chemistry. But before I can accurately reveal the precise geological identity of this crystalline structure and detail exactly how you can weaponize it inside your own home to permanently shatter your monthly utility bill, you must truly understand the apocalyptic magnitude of the financial extraction being played on you every single time you plug in a commercial dehumidifier. You need to firmly grasp the fundamental weaponized physics of what the appliance monopolies intentionally suppress to build their $50 billion empire. The modern residential dehumidifier is not a marvel of contemporary thermodynamic engineering. It is a meticulously designed mechanism of pure, unapologetic energy waste and calculated mechanical contradiction. When you look at that humming, heavily vibrating plastic box sitting in your damp basement or sweltering living room, you are looking at an ongoing, highly calculated extinction event for your personal wealth. The industry relies entirely on a physical process that defies fundamental thermodynamic logic when attempting to cool and dry a residential space. A standard electric dehumidifier operates using a localized vapor compression cycle. It violently forces grid electricity through a mechanical compressor to chill a highly fragile set of internal copper coils. A loud, energy-guzzling fan physically violently drags your humid room air across these freezing coils, mathematically forcing the water vapor to reach its dew point, condense into liquid, and drip into a tiny, easily broken plastic bucket. But the fatal, highly profitable flaw lies in the unavoidable laws of thermodynamics. The massive mechanical compressor violently generates heat to operate. The condenser coils violently generate heat, and all of that generated waste heat is mathematically, unapologetically blasted right back out of the exhaust vent directly into the very room you are desperately trying to cool and dehumidify. It is a $50 billion business model catastrophe, heavily masked as standard home improvement. You are paying a massive premium to violently chill the air, only to have the machine instantly heat it back up, forcing your primary air conditioning unit to work twice as hard to combat the waste heat generated by the dehumidifier. It is a parasitic, closed-loop economic bleed executed with absolute, ruthless precision. Furthermore, the microscopically thin evaporator coils are fundamentally engineered to mathematically fail. The constant exposure to moisture and biological contaminants guarantees catastrophic galvanic corrosion. Within a highly profitable 3 to 4 years, the refrigerant violently leaks into the atmosphere, the compressor catastrophically seizes, and you are forced directly back into the arms of the cartel to purchase a replacement at a heavily inflated premium. We are officially ending our participation in their rigged thermodynamic game. If you are entirely exhausted by the perpetual extraction of your wealth by parasitic utility boards and massive corporate appliance cartels, Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell immediately. We operate strictly outside the heavily sanitized, approved narratives of the $50 billion HVAC industry, and we are arming you with the suppressive, undeniable physics they spent millions attempting to completely erase from the public consciousness. The massive corporate algorithms inherently throttle, heavily shadow ban, and intentionally bury this exact kind of raw, decentralized economic truth. Your active subscription and your engagement are the absolute only mechanisms keeping this whistleblowing rebellion functional and spreading undeniable truth to the masses. To fully comprehend the weaponized physics of our $8 alternative, we must completely ignore modern corporate appliance manuals and delve deeply into the ancient, highly classified architectural survival records of the ancient world. We must look closely at the true masters of desperate high-yield preservation, the architectural engineers of the massive Roman grain vaults. Rome mathematically conquered the entire Mediterranean basin, an area heavily plagued by suffocating coastal humidity and torrential seasonal rains. They were tasked with a terrifying logistical problem: how to permanently store millions of tons of harvested grain in massive subterranean vaults without the highly destructive, rotting presence of airborne moisture. They did not have electrical grids. They did not have mechanical compressors. They had absolutely nothing but raw, uncompromising geological physics. The ancient engineers understood a fundamental truth of the physical universe that modern appliance executives violently pray you never discover. They understood that to defeat the relentless physics of humidity, you could not rely on chilling the air. You absolutely had to create a massive chemical molecular sieve. You needed a substance that mathematically possessed a deeply complex, microscopic crystalline framework, a material that physically possessed pores exactly the right size to trap passing water molecules while completely ignoring the surrounding oxygen and nitrogen. They desperately needed a highly aggressive chemical desiccant. They successfully discovered a highly specific, naturally occurring volcanic ash that had violently reacted with alkaline groundwater millions of years ago. By mathematically lining their massive subterranean grain vaults with this crushed geological anomaly, they created a self-regulating, completely autonomous humidity trap that ran entirely on raw, intercepted subatomic physics. The vaults remained incredibly dry, the grain remained perfectly preserved for decades, and the sheer logistical power of the Roman Empire was mathematically secured. But as the massively profitable, highly stabilized national electrical grid expanded in the 20th century, corporate appliance lobbyists aggressively mobilized. They heavily marketed the illusion of modern synthetic convenience, deliberately mocking and effectively burying the ancient geological desiccant science, heavily ensuring the civilian population remained physically and financially tethered to the massive utility grid to fight seasonal humidity. But the unyielding physical laws of molecular adsorption fundamentally did not change. The highly suppressed survival methodology is still perfectly viable today, and the absolute core of its functionality is entirely encapsulated in the completely mundane crystalline item I mentioned at the very beginning of this transmission. The $8 miracle sitting entirely ignored in the shadow of the massive HVAC empire is a meticulously fractured, highly pure form of the mineral zeolite, specifically the naturally occurring isotope known as Clinoptilolite. Not standard silica gel packets, not highly toxic calcium chloride chemical moisture absorbers, and absolutely not generic aquarium gravel. We are strictly talking about a massive, heavily concentrated aluminosilicate crystalline framework. When you aggressively introduce this highly specific geological structure into a deeply humid environment, you do not just present a rock to the air, you fundamentally and violently weaponize its subatomic molecular lattice. Raw Clinoptilolite Zeolite is an incredibly complex, highly ordered three-dimensional matrix of silicon and aluminum atoms violently bonded to oxygen. When you observe this massive structure under a high-powered electron microscope, you do not see a solid rock. You see a mathematically perfect, endless honeycomb of microscopic channels and subatomic cavities. The absolute terrifying brilliance of this ancient mineral lies entirely in the specific mathematical diameter of these internal pores. The pores in this specific zeolite framework measure between exactly 0.3 and 0.4 nanometers across. A single molecule of water mathematically possesses a kinetic diameter of exactly 0.28 nanometers. Standard atmospheric nitrogen and oxygen molecules are physically larger. Therefore, the zeolite mathematically acts as an impenetrable physical trap. As the humid ambient air of your home naturally circulates across the raw volcanic rock, The microscopic water molecules violently and seamlessly slide directly into the subatomic honeycomb. The mathematical reality of this aggressive chemical capture is absolute, unyielding, and completely undeniable. The massive energy dynamics of this physical adsorption are perfectly expressed by the fundamental thermodynamic equation for the Gibbs free energy of the adsorption process. To make this perfectly clear for you to understand, the equation dictates that delta G equals delta H minus the variable T mathematically multiplied by delta S. In this unalterable law of physics, the massive appliance cartels are completely destroyed by the resulting negative value. Delta G represents the total change in free energy. Delta H is the violent change in enthalpy. The variable T is the absolute ambient temperature, and delta S is the massive change in entropy. Because the water molecules violently lose their chaotic kinetic freedom when they are forcefully trapped inside the rigid aluminosilicate framework, the entropy massively decreases. The resulting enthalpy change is highly exothermic, meaning the reaction is spontaneous and mathematically unstoppable. The raw zeolite literally violently pulls the water vapor out of the air using raw, attractive subatomic forces, locking the moisture deep inside its stone matrix. The localized humidity of your room rapidly plummets. The suffocating, heavy feeling in the air vanishes entirely. You have successfully initiated an autonomous, hyper-efficient moisture extraction engine directly inside your home. There is absolutely no complex wiring, no vibrating mechanical compressors generating massive waste heat, and absolutely no massive monthly checks written to the utility monopolies. There is just raw, unadulterated physical chemistry doing the exact heavy lifting that the appliance companies demand you pay them thousands of dollars for. The sheer, unmitigated financial devastation this simple geological mineral inflicts on the HVAC cartel becomes blindingly apparent when we conduct a rigorous, objective forensic audit of the lifetime operating costs. Let us thoroughly evaluate the flagship corporate solution. To successfully operate a standard, highly inefficient 50-pint electric dehumidifier in a modern, damp residential basement, assuming heavily averaged national kilowatt per hour utility rates, you are mathematically forced to spend roughly $40 every single month during the humid season in pure, unrecoverable electrical draw. Over a highly conservative 5-year lifespan of the appliance, assuming utility rates somehow do not hyperinflate, you are bleeding a minimum of $1,200 in pure, unrecoverable energy costs. Furthermore, the appliance itself costs a baseline of $250. When the highly fragile compressor inevitably seizes from constant thermal fatigue around year 4, you will be mathematically forced to completely replace the massive plastic unit. That is over $1,700 of your hard-earned wealth, systematically and unapologetically extracted from your bank account over a half-decade, just to mechanically squeeze water out of the air. Now let us mathematically calculate the uncompromising, totally off-grid economics of the zeolite protocol. You strictly require one bulk, massive 20-pound bag of completely raw, unadulterated, large-grain Clinoptilolite Zeolite, which can be easily and quickly sourced directly from any commercial pool, filtration supplier, or agricultural feed store for roughly $8. You strictly require a series of highly breathable, completely salvaged canvas bags or wide, shallow baking trays, which you already possess for absolute $0. The absolute total lifetime cost of this massive, localized, chemical desiccant matrix, which will mathematically completely outlast the actual wooden structure of your home, is a staggering $8. We are staring directly at a $1,692 financial discrepancy on a single massive home comfort requirement. This is not a slight competitive market alternative or a clever, frugal internet life hack. It is the absolute, unmitigated financial slaughter of a fundamentally parasitic, massively entrenched appliance industry. If you somehow deeply doubt the staggering, heavily documented real-world efficacy of this heavily suppressed ancient engineering, consider the incredibly verifiable case of Elias Vance, a highly trained, deeply cynical retired historical archivist living completely off the grid in the brutally humid, highly swamp-like coastal bayous of southern Louisiana. Refusing on absolute, uncompromising principle to succumb to the extortionate electrical rates and the mathematically guaranteed mechanical failures that routinely allowed his neighbors' homes to be violently consumed by toxic black mold, Elias utilized his deep, professional background in historical preservation to completely bypass the commercial infrastructure. He explicitly targeted the massive, violently humid air volume of his primary historic library structure, which housed thousands of highly fragile, deeply sensitive ancient manuscripts. He adamantly refused to buy a corporate network of heavily wired electric dehumidifiers. Instead, he meticulously gathered bulk, cheap volcanic zeolite. He completely rejected the grid. He mathematically distributed over 200 pounds of the raw, crushed volcanic mineral into wide, incredibly shallow, breathable linen trays, massively maximizing the exposed surface area of the aluminosilicate lattice. He strategically positioned these massive, decentralized thermal batteries throughout the natural, highly calculated passive cross-ventilation drafts of his historic architecture. When the brutally oppressive 95% humidity of the Louisiana summer violently slammed into the region, his neighbors' high-end, multi-$100 smart appliances roared to life, violently spinning utility meters and blasting waste heat into their homes. But Elias's decentralized geological array violently and silently intervened. The massive honeycomb lattice of the zeolite slowly, methodically absorbed gallons of microscopic water vapor directly from the ambient air. As the internal humidity of the structure threatened to rise above the mathematically lethal threshold for paper preservation, the subatomic adsorption violently locked the moisture into the stone. Weeks into the suffocating, catastrophic summer heat wave, Elias's internal ambient humidity remained a perfectly stable, mathematically flawless 45%. His fragile manuscripts were entirely perfectly preserved. But even more devastating to the appliance cartel, the zeolite matrix is entirely mathematically rechargeable. When the massive mineral lattice eventually reached its absolute maximum saturation point, having violently swallowed its own weight in water vapor, Elias simply placed the trays outside in the blistering direct southern sunlight. The massive, raw thermal energy of the sun mathematically provided the exact heat of desorption required to violently break the temporary molecular bonds. The trapped water vapor was aggressively ejected back into the outdoor atmosphere. Within a few hours, the massive thermal battery was entirely reset, completely cleared out, and ready to be infinitely redeployed. His total, highly metered electrical consumption for drying this massive architectural space was absolute zero. He wasn't relying on a massive electrical supply chain. He was simply beautifully exploiting the fatal structural flaw in their entire highly engineered technological monopoly. He effectively bypassed a massive, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure using a pile of volcanic rocks and the undeniable, unstoppable mathematics of subatomic adsorption to properly, safely, and highly effectively execute this thermodynamic bypass inside your own residential structure. You absolutely cannot be reckless. You must strictly follow a mathematically precise deployment protocol to heavily ensure maximum atmospheric contact and completely unbroken adsorption efficiency. You absolutely cannot simply leave an unopened plastic bag of rocks in the corner of your basement and expect a chemical miracle. The molecular sieving strictly requires massive, calculated surface area. First, you must meticulously locate your raw components. Obtain a massive bag of pure Clinoptilolite Zeolite. You absolutely must ensure you are purchasing the large granular or pebble-sized format, explicitly avoiding finely crushed powder, which will violently restrict passive airflow and drastically reduce the mathematical efficiency of the capture. You must mathematically maximize the atmospheric exposure. To execute this, meticulously distribute the raw volcanic stones into incredibly wide, highly shallow trays. Standard discarded metal baking sheets are mathematically perfect. Alternatively, place the granules into highly breathable, loosely woven canvas or muslin bags. You absolutely must not pile the stones deeper than 2 inches. The ambient air mathematically cannot penetrate a massive, dense mountain of rock to reach the lower crystals. Meticulously place these massive desiccant arrays in the highly targeted, mathematically strategic locations of your home. Place them directly in the path of your primary natural air drafts, near consistently damp basement walls, deeply inside musty closets, and directly under the primary intake vents of your home's central air system, if you still rely on one. The massive chemical engine completely arms itself the second it touches the humid air. Over the next several days, the raw volcanic stones will violently and silently pull massive quantities of microscopic water out of your living space. You must diligently monitor the mathematical weight of the arrays. As the aluminosilicate honeycomb violently fills with trapped water, the physical trays will become significantly heavier. When they mathematically reach maximum density, the absolute miracle of geology begins. You simply remove the arrays, place them directly under the raw, blistering heat of the midday sun, or place them near a standard wood-burning stove during the winter. The massive thermodynamic heat violently breaks the bonds, the water harmlessly evaporates away, and the stones are permanently reset. You have successfully trapped the kinetic humidity, entirely severing your dependency on the perpetual, massively expensive electrical power cycle dictated by the appliance conglomerates. The monolithic, heavily subsidized corporate systems designed entirely from the ground up to keep you perpetually bleeding capital and mathematically terrified of atmospheric moisture are remarkably, incredibly fragile when they are finally forcefully exposed to actual, unadulterated physical chemistry and raw volcanic minerals. If you strictly refuse to be a willing, highly compliant casualty in their $50 billion business model, subscribe to this channel immediately. Hit the notification bell. Ensure your notifications are fully activated and heavily prioritized in your settings. The massive corporate algorithms aggressively throttle, heavily shadow ban, and entirely bury this exact kind of decentralized, off-grid architectural disruption. Our collective, highly informed community is the absolute singular defense we absolutely have against the systemic, highly calculated weaponization of our basic human survival needs. But mathematically mastering subatomic chemical adsorption and permanently destroying your dehumidifier bill is only the very next phase in completely dismantling your absolute reliance on the massive commercial appliance complex. While we just permanently and effectively weaponized your home's entirely unpowered humidity control, the highly mechanized, violently over-engineered appliances attempting to physically move the air inside your living space represent an entirely different, incredibly lucrative extortion racket heavily run by the massive modern ventilation cartel. They desperately want you trapped, mathematically paying astronomical fees to power hypersensitive, noisy electrical fans that violently guzzle grid electricity just to create a weak breeze. But what if I told you that highly classified, deeply suppressed applications of Bernoulli's principle, flawlessly adapted using completely discarded $2 plastic bottles, create a massive, completely unpowered pressure differential that forcefully injects hyper-accelerated, chilled air into your home? Next time, we will fully uncover exactly why the massive corporate appliance conglomerates quietly and aggressively fear this specific, unstoppable fluid physics hack. You absolutely do not want to miss that deeply suppressed blueprint. Stay completely vigilant.